Join Finastra for its global hackathon and be part of the movement. Welcome to Hack to the Future 4. Connect with our global community to learn about decentralized finance. Discover how to build a better future with sustainable and inclusive finance. And learn how to scale up with banking as a service and embedded finance. Win prizes from Finastra and our partners to help you continue your fintech journey. Register now at fintech.devpost.com.
Christophe, you're unmuted. Now you can hear me.
Starting well. Thank you. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Christophe Langlois. I'm the Global Head of Marketing for Fintech and Developer Ecosystem at Finastra. And we are welcoming you to another live conversation as part of our Thought Leadership content series during the 4th edition of our Global Fintech Hackathon. And the hackathon is open until 10th of April, so please register today and submit your entries by then. Hack to the Future is more than a hackathon. It's a fintech movement igniting a world of financial sustainability, inclusion, and empowerment. So building on the success of the previous ones we organized to redefine finance for good and build an unbiased fintech future, we continue to use our position in the market to inspire the fintech space to be more open by default for everyone. And this year, we aim to drive engagement beyond our global fintech ecosystem with 3 key themes that are exclusive to and open to all, and you don't need to be a tech head or a developers to enter. One is sustainable and inclusive finance, ESG. Second one is embedded finance, banking as a service and contextual banking. And third, last but not least, it's decentralized finance. And our content series is meant to inspire our hackers and anybody interested in these essential themes. So this session is about 30 to 45 minutes, possibly an hour even. It's followed by questions, or if you've got great questions, I'll make sure to address and share those questions with the speakers during the session. Feel free to ask your questions on social media if you are watching us live. If you are watching on demand, then feel free to connect with us on social media to do so. And today we'll be talking about DeFi, and we'll focus on the exciting area of trade finance. So international trade finance, the COVID pandemic has put the global supply chain in the spotlight. To give you an idea of scale, for those of you who are not too familiar with trade finance, the World Trade Organization claimed that 80 to 90% of the flow of goods is dependent on trade finance. And unfortunately as well, this is an industry which relies a lot still on manual processes and on a lot of paper-based documentation. And again, to give you a sense of scale, the ICC, International Commerce Commission, in their annual report said recently that still 45% of banks have completely manual document verification processes. So anyway, we see a lot of disruption, and it's usually driven by 2 key themes or effects. It's driving automation and digitization. So we're going to touch those topics today. We're going to touch about regulation and standardization. And standardization, for a French, it's hard to pronounce. It's critical. We've got the standardization of data, of goods, and money. That's the 3rd pillar, which is important. And as Chris Larson would say, he's the executive chairman of Ripple and co-founder of Prosper.com, you really can't have workable globalization unless you have interoperability in 3 things: data, goods, and money. And we only have it in 2 things right now: data and goods. Without the money part, globalization just doesn't work. It's incomplete. So I'm really, really excited today. We've got like 2 great speakers. Those speakers have a formidable experience in the topic of trade finance, and they're also both from Colombia. So, caballeros, hola, ¿qué más?
Hola, Christopher, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, yeah. Mi colombiano es aún más limitado. So lo siento por no parar español. Yeah. That's the extent of our Spanish. Sorry, guys.
Hola, Christophe.
Hola, Miguel. Yeah. So anyway, we're going to start with the introduction. So let's start with Alejandro Gutierrez. So you're a citizen of the world, I believe. You're from Colombia. I think you lived in Australia and you live in the UK. I love your LinkedIn, infectious attitude and enjoyment taken from providing guidance and coaching to other team members. That's great. And you work at Defactor as an operation lead and consult rights as a chief strategy officer. Could you please spend a minute or so describing and telling us who you are?
Well, as you say, citizen of the world, been around the world for the last 20 years also. I'm now in Dublin, Ireland, and I ended up in this rabbit hole of DeFi for the last 3 years. Basically, just trying to redefine how financial systems are working and how we can improve the provision of liquidity for the community, societies, and business that are in need of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. And again, you will be able to share a lot of those insights and that experience during our conversation. So thank you, muchas gracias. And you, Miguel, could you please do the same? So again, we could do it in French, I guess, with you. You spend time in my own country and you work at Finastra. So please tell us more about you.
Sure. Colombian, as you mentioned, I had the possibility to work in retail banking in Colombia, to work in corporate banking in France and Spain. With the corporate banking, specifically in transaction banking. Also, I have worked in Fintech in a specialized supplier of trade finance solutions. And as you just mentioned, right now I work at Finastra as a performance management and insight principal. And I'm mostly focused in ICC TradeCom, which is Finastra's initiative towards tackling the trade financing gap.
Thank you, Miguel, for the intro. So if we, let me hide that. Yeah. If we start, so let's start again with the basics, if you don't mind. So maybe Miguel, can you, for someone who doesn't know too much about the trade finance industry, for a newbie or noob, could you please explain what it is? What is trade finance and supply chain finance? So again, let's say quite high level, but please share your knowledge with us.
Sure. Trade finance is usually referred as the set of instruments or financial instruments and products that help companies so they can have enough working capital for doing either export or imports transactions. This can also be taken to the level of not only international transactions, but also domestic ones, both, let's say, from a supply chain finance perspective or from a cash management perspective. So let's say this encompasses say a broader term that is not only the trade finance part, but also it works under the umbrella of a transaction banking or working capital solutions.
Okay, thank you for the rapid intro. We talk about, you've got a few slides. I don't know if you want to go through them at all, but the reason we're meeting up today essentially is to talk about the trade finance gap, right? So what would be interesting is to better understand what that means. First of all, what is the gap? I don't know if it's you or Alejandro, if you want to step up and tell us what you think. We talk about in 2020 a service gap of around 1.5 trillion, I believe, dollars, and now with COVID it might go up to 2 trillion. Those are huge numbers. So what is the gap, where it's coming from, and what can we do about it? Alejandro, Miguel, up to you.
Yeah, Miguel, I don't know if you want to just give details. I think it's interesting. You have a couple of good stats and data in that regard that will be probably important just to show everybody for framework.
Sure. I think let's start with a couple of definitions. So, I mean, the trade financing gap affects both, let's say, corporate, large companies, medium-sized ones, small ones, and micro enterprises, if we're talking at a domestic level or in a lesser volume to an international one. So let's start speaking by who's whom. So micro enterprises are usually defined as companies with less than 10 employees, SMEs, or smaller and medium-sized enterprises with employees in between 11 and 250, and MSMEs encompasses the last two definitions. The reason I'm providing these definitions and keeping it at an employee level is because this might change, because in some cases, this can be defined from a sales perspective or from an asset perspective. So these definitions change by country. For the perspective of this conversation, this is a more generalistic view. So that would be the first part. The second part is to understand what is the financing gap, or what is the gap, and what is its size. So the financing gap is basically the difference in between supply and demand of financing to enterprises. There are different studies in the subject. Probably the most known ones are the one on the left-hand side, which is by the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, which includes not only the international aspect, but also the domestic one. And it says that it's $5.2 trillion. Now, if we go to the second study, which is also very well known by Asian Development Bank, and it's actually more recent, they said that is 1.7 by 2021. Now, important to consider is that the one on the right-hand side is mostly focused on international financing. So that one will take into less consideration the micro enterprises one, because it's focused on SMEs and large companies. So let's say that's why the numbers differ mostly. So either we see it from one study or the other. I think the important part here is that we're talking about a huge number that is impacting a considerable number of enterprises at a global level, and a high percentage of them. So as you can see in this slide, we're talking about basically 41% or 131 million of MSMEs, so micro, small, medium-sized enterprises, have an unmet trade finance demand. So these companies are constrained in achieving their financing needs. Therefore, they cannot grow as companies that, of course, can obtain this financing. Now, the question will be, well, why does it matter? Why is this important? Why is this relevant from a societal perspective? So, first of all, because it's not focusing in one part of the world. In this study that you can see here, they're considering 128 countries. We can see that the problem is more or is stronger in developing countries. So here, just to have an overview. And of course, it is important also to mention that there are clear causes for this gap. So let's say financial institutions, or let's say suppliers of financing, which can be different types of entities, usually consider that anti-money laundering and know your customer requirements, which are related to risk scoring, are key components of or a key reason for not being able to provide this financing, as well as other aspects, for example, high transaction cost or low fee of income. I'm focusing on specific ones because there are others that are more, let's say, seasonal, as for example, the general economic uncertainty due to COVID-19. So as we can see, let's say, risk assessment, risk, say, control, and high transaction costs make not only risky, but also not profitable for, let's say, traditional suppliers of financing to serve specific segments, which are, of course, the lower segments of the enterprises.
That's a really interesting point, right? Because one of the components that we always discuss is the fact that in order to close that gap that exists there, we need to just come with new ways and new methodologies to assess risk. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's not there, right? One of the things that we're seeing is companies coming with new mathematical models that are going to bring a more holistic view of the supply chain. At the end of the day, trade finance is a service, it's a financial service that is provided in the supply chain, right? So you need to mitigate the risk across the whole supply chain and not just in the financial flow of that supply chain. So it is key that the three layers are getting together in order just to have a proper assessment of what is happening on it, right? Traditional institutions at the moment don't have that expertise, but I don't think it's something for them to have anyway. But there is technology that can allow them, right, just to improve all the way that they are assessing risk, right? That's the way I see it. there are a lot of developments from the trade finance side on how to optimize the process, but realistically, that's not the key issue that we're facing, right? The key issue is that we need to use lower barriers of entry for more companies, and especially the SMEs, to just tap into the liquidity and finance that is so needed in order for them to scale and improve the current conditions, right?
But- So you're saying in essence again, like it's good to improve processes, but that's not the answer, right? We need to give access to bigger liquidity pools from and for the smaller institutions, and that's where the key, the win is for everybody, right? And the creator of value. But if I may as well, that's a very great point actually about risk as well, risk assessment. When we talk about, I'd love to talk a bit more about Defactor and console freight, if it's okay with you. I believe you, Defactor, said like last year or 2 years ago, DeFi is a shot in the arm for the trade finance industry, right? And you see like the RWAs, the real world asset, as the next opportunity. So first of all, Defactor is decentralized factoring, right? That's the first question, but that's not a question.
Defactor is coming from that, yeah. But
Yeah.
I will give you a little bit more on it.
So please give us more in a second. But you say on your LinkedIn tagline, you're bridging the real world assets to DeFi. So could you please explain, so maybe then the origin of Defactor, and also what are the concepts behind RWA and RWAO, so the real world assets? Because I think that's a key component, of course, of your approach to DeFi and to transforming trade finance.
Yeah, and probably the best way to do that is just telling you a bit of the story behind, well, Console and Defactor. So Console was a company that was set up in the beginning to just provide digitization solutions to the supply chain and logistic industry. And we, even though we knew that it was always an issue with the liquidity in the space, right? With COVID, we realized that was the main issue. So digitization was always important, but people just forgot completely about implementing new technical solutions and just focus on actually how they were going to be able to get access to the liquidity required for them to keep running during COVID. And one of the triggers out of that was the increase of logistic cost. I don't know if you remember, but pre-COVID, a container from China to LA was around $2,500, $3,000, something like that. When COVID hit, that price tripled and sometimes even 4 times, right? So you could be paying $12,000 for the same container. That meaning that there was the amount of the need for liquidity was just dramatic. And that changed completely the perspective of not only the supply chain companies, logistic companies, but also the producers, the manufacturers, the importers that were on the other side that needed to just not cope only with the increase of the price for their own goods, but also with the transport, right? So what we say is like, look, if we assess the risk completely, sorry, in a completely different manner, what we're going to be able to achieve is use the goods that are trapped in the container for 60 days as collateral for these people to access liquidity. And if we do that, we're going to be able just to decrease barriers of entry for these new companies to just tap into the financial sector. And
just to mention something there, because it is really interesting what Alejandro is mentioning, which is, so what Defactor is doing at that point is basically tackling one of the key points of the trade finance gap from a, let's say, financing perspective, which is finding a solution, or one of the multiple solutions, but this is a solution to the lack of collateral that SMEs have, because at this point it is very difficult for them to go a financial institution, require financing, and when asked for the collateral, they don't have it. And this is a high percentage of companies that are actually lacking as collateral. So this is a key point, a key winning point for the factory if it is solving that aspect.
Yeah. So just to add on that one, right? Like it is so that was Console Freight, right? The company that is solving that component. But then when we hit a wall was when we started looking for liquidity, right? So we say, look, we have this product, and I think this product is amazing and will help a lot of people. But when you start actually just get the liquidity to be able to provide that financial service, we just hit a wall. right? And we knock on so many doors. And the problem was like it doesn't fit on the traditional scope or the traditional way that risk mitigated from the investment point of view, right? Because they didn't get it, right? It's too completely different to what is set up right now for trade finance. So the only option that we found was DeFi. And we managed to get that liquidity that was needed from the DeFi space. And we managed to just run POCs, pilots, and set up a product, right? Using solely funds from liquidity pools in the DeFi space, right? So from that point, that was 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, where we have placed more than $20 million in transactions, and we have to collateralize around 500 assets. Those are the figures so far, right?
Cool.
So when we were at that stage, right, we say like, look, this is a fantastic opportunity, but how can we scale the use of DeFi for real world assets, right? Because DeFi is or it was created in the beginning for digital assets and how you can transact in a decentralized manner without the need from anyone in the middle, right? Using your digital assets as collateral. But what if we do the same with real world assets, right? So we bring those invoices into the space. What if we bring goods into the space? What about illiquid assets that have tremendous value, right? And that was kind of the idea behind Defactor. Say like, let's set up that pipeline, that connector to just bring real world assets, traditional financial players, and even new digital economy financial players into this space for all of them to tap into the DeFi space as an alternative source of liquidity. And that was the idea behind that. So let's say, let's bring more console freights into this DeFi pipeline. And also, let's bring some other traditional companies that are in need of liquidity, because funny enough, you have a lot of these SMEs, financial providers, that are still in need of liquidity. And this can be a game changer for them, right?
And that's fascinating. Again, you're proving that necessity is the mother of all inventions, right? So you managed to create a solution to a challenge you were facing yourself. On that note, so can you give us an idea of a key milestone, key achievement from the organization now and 2022? So what's your what excites you the most from the industry? What's next for what's the next step in terms of growth for your organization?
Well, I think the opportunities that DeFi is opening for society, right? I think there are two key components that I see from the DeFi space. One is that democratization of investment, meaning that everybody can just invest 500 quid or 1,000 quid or whatever they have into a project they believe, and nobody's going to tell them no. And I think that's extremely powerful, because at some point investment was a kind of a privilege that only few had. And that is changing completely the way that people are perceiving finance, which on my view is extremely exciting. But the other one is the opportunities that this is opening, as I say, to just close these financial gaps that are around and the need for liquidity, right? I think the procurement of liquidity is going to change dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years, and DeFi is going to just play a huge role in this transformation.
But and I get to you, Miguel, in a second, if you don't mind. But okay, so what's the key blocker then to really for your approach actually to really take off? Is it still a matter of education, awareness, being able to again educate the market, make them aware of the opportunity, the potential, and the limited risk of adopting such an you know what I mean? Is there a silver bullet to take you to a unicorn status? In the next few years?
It's a great question, but I think it's all of the above, right? Like the space is so young, it's so immature, right? If you believe or you think about DeFi as a space that has been here for the last, let's say, 5 years, but then if you go into the real world asset space, that is even less time than that, right? So I think the achievements have been fantastic, and what companies are doing in the space for the short period of time, I think is mind blowing. But we still need a lot of education. We still need to improve actually the user experience, that I think is completely key. There are a lot of the protocols that have fantastic ideas, but it's still really tricky to deal with the DeFi space, especially if you are in the financial sector. For you to be tapping into the liquidity, it will be really hard. Like we did it because we were desperate, right? We didn't have any option, right? But a company that has been set up and that wants to scale the use, it will be extremely difficult. And I think that's kind of what the industry requires, right? Like, look, just make things easier for people to be tapping into these. And probably if we ask Miguel, we have some other points out of it, like for example, the regulatory component and also everything that has to be with trust in the space. So
and that's a good. Thank you. Muchas gracias, Alejandro. That's a very good segue because now, Miguel, if we not talk just about your organization, which is very exciting and forward thinking, but the key challenges again and opportunities. We mentioned education. You just mentioned regulation. Those are key drivers, of course, of and necessity again to take that market, to make that market almost and take it to the next level. So if you could share, Miguel, maybe some of your experience on that. So the role of regulation in trade finance, but again to support an approach based on DeFi. Is it something you'd like to talk about? And then which is linked to it, and I think it's fascinating, you mentioned your map of the world, you know, when we mentioned developing countries, but the paradox almost is the following, right? It's like there's so much appetite from countries like in Latin America in terms of, again, the appetite for Bitcoins, for crypto, for blockchain. So, and that's fascinating as well. So I don't know if you can share some of your knowledge, regulation, what part of the world, why is it booming in Latin America? The mic is yours. If it's not too much of an open question, that is.
Sure. So there are so many aspects about it. I mean, regulation is in constant change, and it acts as an enhancer of innovation for moving it around. So they open regulation, they will enhance innovation at the same time. So, for example, let's say the cases of countries like Malaysia, in which they have regulatory sandboxes in which companies can try new business models, right, for a certain period of time, and then regulation can be shaped accordingly, so it can work and it can provide a framework for those already tested models. Other countries such as Colombia are using this type of frameworks. Other countries are establishing already, let's say, fintech law, in which, let's say, early examples of those tackle directly the payments space or tackle directly the crypto space. So we see fluctuation of the evolution of regulation across different countries and across different regions. In the case of LATAM, or Latin American specific, what we can see is a trend in which basically regulation and infrastructure go together. So we see, for example, in South America, there is a high number of countries that have already deployed e-invoice repositories. So this is basically the digitalization of e-invoices. And so what is happening is that these assets, these invoices, now can be, let's say, communicated and distributed in a different way, which is faster, which is digital. Now, let's say we can automate those processes. And that is basically the base for the developing of new business models. So if we see South America, we see that there are countries such as Chile in specific, Brazil, Mexico, which are quite advanced in supply chain financing solutions, which is within the transaction banking spectrum. And they are using this kind of e-invoice repositories for accelerating, of course, the processes through different ways, which is basically a way for down-tiering what is already being supplied to large corporates and to large organizations to lower segments. So this is really interesting. There are, of course, let's say, in relation to this, there are other components of the ecosystem that are being developed at the same time. So, for example, this is about information, no? So, for example, there are specialized companies in know your customer, know your transaction, that are developing these information about the companies that can be shared throughout the fintech ecosystem. So in this way, they are sharing this information, or at least making it available, so the other players can build solutions on top of that. So yeah, it is really interesting. I do have a question for Alejandro. Now that I answered the questions, I wanted to ask Alejandro, what are your early adopters in Defactor, and where are they located?
Oh, it's interesting. So we have created a program that is called a Springpad. And basically what we do in a Springpad is just look for companies that want to be early adopters in the DeFi space, and just for them to tap into decentralization and understand if it works for them or not. Fun enough, one of the companies that we onboarded for the first cohort is a Chilean company that specializes in providing factoring services in the invoicing space. And it makes perfect sense, right? Because when they have this full digital solution, right, that can just be plugged directly into the decentralized finance space and tap from that liquidity. So what we are seeing is there are a lot of companies in Latin America that are just seeing different ways to mitigate risk in order to just create that inclusion. And because they are early adopters, right, on the whole crypto space, they're extremely keen just to go on it. From the jurisdiction point of view, as I mentioned, Latin America is one of them. We have companies in Europe as well that are extremely keen to provide financial services in India and in Africa, especially. And the other one is USA, in America. There are a lot of companies in there that understand pretty well all the DeFi space and how they can integrate that for different solutions, right? Yeah, it's extremely interesting because we're still, this is the tip of the iceberg. We don't know where we're going to be heading from when this full digital economy is in full swing, right? When starting talking about metaverse and all the potential financial services that can be provided there. Where is this going to end up? We don't know, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. A lot will change in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
Every day on daily basis, everything is changing pretty much. But Alejandro, so what do you think when a journalist a few months back said that DeFi was the Wild West of crypto? Is it something you recognize, or that's just a catchy title?
Look, it's a catchy title. Well, I think you have the whole spectrum. You have a lot of companies that are doing a lot of serious projects, and you have some other ones that, they are just shooting for the start and getting a lot of investors into it with no much behind. It is, but I don't think that is any different to the non-digital world. Okay, we always have had that, right? We have some other companies that have raised a lot of money without having a proper business model, right? I think the component is the accessibility to it, right? Because if I want to invest in this company, I can just go directly and put my money on it, and that's probably what it changes and make it a bit more or a bit riskier in that sense. So if you don't do your due diligence, and you don't understand how it works, there's a lot of things at risk and at play. And for me, that's the situation. But look, things as everything.
That's an impossible question. It's just an open question. The real question is the following. You mentioned Chile. Is Pisco Sour from Chile or from Peru? That's the only question.
Oh, wow.
Miguel,
wow.
Miguel, so Finastra, we work with the ICC, I believe, or is there anything you can share? Again, maybe work in that space and maybe in that part of the world, Ecuador or in LATAM?
Sure. So Finastra and the International Chamber of Commerce work together in a project called ICC TRICOM. This is the joint initiative towards tackling the trade financing gap. Basically, it is a marketplace in which there is supply and demand. The supply are financiers, and the demand are the MSMEs. We're running the pilot. We're starting to run the pilot in Ecuador. It has been a really interesting experience. Of course, the aim is to test the solution in Ecuador, to collaborate with the companies in Ecuador that have been heavily affected by COVID, and of course to improve the situation and quickly move towards other markets in which we can see that the solution can scale. Basically, there are three products. The first one is invoice financing, the second one is factoring, and the third one is reverse factoring. So we're talking about a holistic approach from a buyer and a supplier perspective, in which we're not only, let's say, servicing those that are usually served, so those that are part of an established supply chain where the information is already available, but via invoice financing, we're servicing those that are usually not integrated in those supply chains, which is, let's say, a considerable proportion or percentage of companies, those that are not integrated there. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fascinating.
That
If people
number,
want,
sorry,
please,
Christophe, if you
Alejandro,
allow
please.
me, that number is huge. In Latin America, that number is huge, right? And the problem is with companies that can't obtain the type of service through the regular channels. They end up in these how to call it, like a black financing markets a lot of the times,
Yeah,
which is
exactly. I mean, it's exactly what you're mentioning. Many of these companies, basically, that don't have the opportunity to obtain financing through, let's say, traditional channels, they're going to end up with a shark loan in the black market, because there is no basically other option for them. They really require the financing for covering their working capital needs. And of course, this is not the best way, but if they have to do it, well, it's understandable.
And do you
So
guys?
it's a real social problem.
It's a huge problem. So I think it's. I mean, we want to deep dive a bit more. But do you guys recognize that figure when reports say that 74% of global businesses that today see their credit applications rejected? Is it like on that level based on your experience? And
I mean, there is an easy proportion to make, which is the following. If we take 100% of the companies, and for example, I have seen in detail the number of companies in Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador. Usually, we're talking that around 80% of those companies are very small businesses, and then the medium and the large ones are the smaller percentage. So if we understand that the small ones and the micro ones are not able to comply with the requirements for obtaining financing from a financial institution, then the number you were speaking makes total sense.
I see.
yeah.
Plus the
I think
lack
there
of
is,
collaterals, as you mentioned, is critical. Please, yeah, Alejandro, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I think the stats is around that 90% of the total business around the world are SMEs,
Yeah.
like MSMEs, right? And funny enough, there is an interesting stat about it. That is like a 50% of employment is coming from those small companies.
Yeah,
50,
yeah.
yeah.
Interestingly, I mean, there are two types of impact. Let's say we're talking about pure economic impact. Maybe it is not only that part that we're tackling, or that wouldn't be the focus, because probably the economic aspect is being covered mostly or produced mostly by the larger firms. So we're talking really about those that provide employment, which are the smaller and micro enterprises. So this is basically the real impact there, which is about employment, and in local communities means, of course, helping to the development and sustainability of those local communities. And if we're talking about that is, let's say, more relevant in developing countries, well, then the aspect, let's say, becomes more relevant.
Yeah, and of course. I mean, those again are such important topics. We could spend hours talking about them. I mean, there's so many things we discussed before kickstarting that live stream. So before we talk about hopefully your expectations and why you're excited with the hackathon and your ideation session tomorrow, for those of you watching us live, any other topics you'd like to discuss today? I know Alejandro and Miguel, we talked about how invoicing companies potentially can plug into the DeFi space to take decisions immediately. So we talked about that, yeah. Is it one of the topics we should spend a few minutes on today, for instance?
I think it is worth to, and I think I will ask Alejandro to complement me here, which is the following. I mean, DeFi, and I'm not the expert, it's Alejandro. as far as I understand, it can, of course, help to solve the problem from a collateral perspective. Okay, Alejandro already mentioned the angle, and also can help to solve the trade finance gap from a liquidity perspective by plugging, let's say, liquidity from the DeFi area into, let's say, different marketplaces or different, let's say, distributors of liquidity that actually run the last mile. So I think those are the two major areas that I can see right now. Alejandro, if there is other one that you want to, let's say, highlight, I think that would be worth.
Great question. Thank you.
It's a great question. Yeah, look, as I mentioned previously, I think that the democratization of investment is extremely critical, and that's the other component, right? Because let's say that the DeFi space, that engine in the middle, right, in which from one side you have people that are able to just invest into whatever they believe as a project. On the other one, you have these asset originators that are just bringing or aggregating assets in order to provide financial services to their customers or to other parties, right? It's an important point here because someone came to me and asked this question and said, look, but what I'm seeing right now is that the people with money are making more money in the DeFi space, right? And now if I want to get a loan, I need crypto. And with that crypto, I can just take a loan. I say, yeah, and that's partially true. But what the DeFi space is allowing is new companies with completely different business models to provide by proxy, not directly, by proxy, that liquidity to those smaller players that are really in need for it, right? So let's say we can just create a really big ecosystem of these alternative financial players, right? Or traditional players that want to just tackle this gap, right? And use the DeFi liquidity to plug it. Now where you're starting to say, yeah, look, there's a huge, or is a completely different perspective on how you are tackling the problem, right? That is realistically about providing liquidity more than making processes more efficient. Because at the end of the day, that doesn't really solve the real issue that we have from here.
Democratizing investment is a really interesting aspect. In, let's say, within the spectrum of alternative sources of financing, crowdsourcing is taking relevance, and if, let's say, DeFi can take place for enhancing that and for pushing it, I think that would be great. Of course, I'm pretty sure people will see that. Let's say there are financing opportunities in the short term with high yield in supply chain finance, for example. So that would be a great opportunity for investment.
Yeah, correct. Look, and there is something like DeFi space needs definitely of the traditional investment funds as well, because there is not enough money at the moment in the DeFi space. So we need to just actually convince these guys to just understand how it works and what are the benefits of it, because there are a lot of benefits from the technology point of view that the same traditional institutions can just come on top. At the end of the day, DeFi is no more than technology that can be applied, right? How you use technology is a completely different question. But educating people is the only way to just grow the ecosystem. And as I believe, like if we grow this ecosystem, we're going to be able to grow that financial transformation, right?
And on that topic, sorry.
Please go.
Miguel, so just quickly, sorry, thank you, Miguel. On that topic, we talk about education a lot, right? It's still critical at the moment. Who should educate then? Which party? I mean, everybody should, but who would have the best shot at driving mass education, if you wish?
I mean, I'm going to take the words of Alejandro because he was mentioning complementarity, and I think that is very important. I mean, there is not like one solution, or let's say one actor will solve it all. I think here goes, let's say we have the DeFi part, we have the distributor part, of course, government will play a role as well as the private sector. So I think there should be complementarity. So, for example, in the case of ICC TradeCom, the initiative of Finastra and the International Chamber of Commerce, it will be our local partner, the Chamber of Commerce of Quito in Ecuador, the one that is going to provide that education. Is because education is really key, that let's say the owners or the managers of these small and medium-sized enterprises actually get to know that they have the possibility to use these new sources of financing, and sometimes it's simply the lack of knowledge that these opportunities are there for them to be used.
I mean, usually it's like exactly a lack of awareness, lack of understanding of what's involved, or sometimes how simple or easy and doable it is to access. So, and that's of course not a small feat. It's still extremely hard to drive education, even in that space. Plus, at the same time, it's such a buzzy space, right? Crypto, DeFi, blockchain. I think
There's a lot of
people might
noise.
you know what exactly, so a lot of people probably have misconceptions as well, individuals and potentially entities or small organizations as well. Yeah, so
Yeah, no doubt. Like, I think it's difficult just to understand what is noise from what is not, and even for us that are in the space, sometimes it's hard to tell. So for a regular Joe, try to imagine that, right? But look, this is an again, like I think there are cycles that repeat in a way. Like in the traditional financial system, you have that as well, right? Still, people don't really understand realistically how the traditional financial sector works, and for how long the space has been running, right? So I think the education component is something that is needed. Like people need to understand how finance works, right? Even though you don't like it, you need to understand it, because that's the reality that we are at, and it's important for everybody just to know there are alternatives, that there are possibilities out there, right?
and that's a topic that I really love. Actually, it's the topic of how do you drive education? Which kind of content? Who creates it? Who should deliver it? Who would be trusted to deliver it? You know what I mean? Like how basic should we be? How complicated? And it's fascinating. It's not even easy in marketing for B2B marketing, right? So
Yeah.
let alone for those like very important yet very new trends or topics or technologies. But I think it's a exciting and extremely important topic. How do we create that those materials and
I think
deliver it?
education goes along with ease of use, because there should be a balance in between how much do we need to educate someone or to inform someone, and how easy is the solution to use. So they don't need to have I don't know, a huge education to approach, because it might be actually so complex. So I think ease of use is going to be a high driver of adoption of any sort of solution that is launched.
I mean, you're right. The simplicity,
Yeah.
but you've got simplicity, and you still need the trust. That's simplicity, trust, and trust. There's at least two types. We know it's the rational trust. It's working. It's secure. Blah. And there's the emotional trust, right? Do I trust it?
Yeah.
I mean, do I know someone who is using? So it's again fascinating topic, which is not just for DeFi, not just for trade finance, but which is maybe even more of a challenge in that space. So again, a lot hopefully will come in the next few months and years for sure, not only from our organizations but from the ecosystem. If I may, actually, if you're watching live tomorrow, there'll be an ideation session, and Miguel and Alejandro kindly are giving more of their time. It's going to be very interactive, and again, I think it's worth attending, and you'll have a unique opportunity to exchange, right? How would you promote that session, and what would you like to achieve from that session? Maybe in a nutshell, you don't have to spend too much time, but Miguel or Alejandro?
I mean, I will, let me put the hat of an entrepreneur. If I use the hat or the thinking of an entrepreneur, this is an opportunity for understanding more about either 1.7 trillion or 5 point something, the size of the opportunity, which I consider is a quite interesting size of the market to approach. And that would be the first part that I will do from a simply entrepreneurial perspective. So I think I will start by saying that, Alejandro.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar, right? Like, okay, for me would be just creating some ideas that will allow new ways to mitigate risk in order to bring more SMEs or cater for SMEs in these financial services, right? And if from that point, like if you develop that, it will be easier just to plug either to the DeFi space or any other source of liquidity, right? But I think that's the key. Just think outside the box and see how you can create inclusion.
Now, I mentioned the numbers from a global perspective. Now, if we let's say down level it to a country perspective, the person that is going to, or the people that are going to join the session, I think are going to understand what are the key aspects that are important to take into consideration towards developing a solution adjusted to their specific countries. So taking into account, let's say, those filters, they can clearly focus towards a specific segment or a specific geography that they would like to tackle.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's a great thing, right? Because there are a lot of industries right there that are completely untouched. And I can mention one that is the cannabis industry, completely untouched. Huge potential. But and like that,
I don't know what
many
to
more.
say. Quick, second, next question. No, I'm kidding. No, you're right. There's the industry which are vastly untapped. One anecdote is like I disappeared for a second. I wanted to give you the spotlight, and we doubled the number of people on YouTube watching. So maybe that's a hint. Maybe I shouldn't be on screen. I should be in the background. Anyway, so please come to the session. I mean, if you're watching, it's going to be great. And again, you don't have to be a techie, you don't have to be a developer. You come with your ideas from various industries, various walks of life. I think we all like become richer, and we've got a better shot identifying new opportunities and possibilities all together. That's what we're trying to achieve. And for the hackathon then, so our hackathon 4th we organize, Finastra, global hackathon, people from all over the world gathering, and we've got 3 topics, one of them being DeFi, ESG, which is almost transversal, but also a topic, and embedded finance. Any key, again, you mentioned that already, but anything else you'd like to achieve? And making the most of that unique opportunity, like that reach from the judges, from the various partners we have from all over the world. Alejandro, is there anything which excites you or connections you're very keen to make during the hackathon?
Yeah, definitely, Luca. I think we are always open to just hear it from people with ideas, right? Like our history has been about connecting the dots in so many different ways to just create a more robust solution. That's kind of what that's kind of our philosophy, right? So learning from different industries, learning from what other companies are doing is always extremely exciting, right? And hearing how we can collaborate is always extremely important for us. Like just I say, for example, what Miguel was mentioning about the operating in Ecuador is just extremely interesting, right? For us would be wow, like you're saying how like the power of the community, right, can change completely or can close the gap for trade finance, right? And how collaboration across multiple entities can just have an impact is what we're all about, right?
Yeah, collaboration is key again. And you, Miguel, so any key expectations or personal, interest in the hackathon?
Yeah, I mean, from Finastra's perspective, it is clear that most of the innovation doesn't happen in-house. It is actually out there. So we are here for helping, for fostering innovation, for providing the tools, for really trying to foster the entire fintech ecosystem towards really tackling the big issues and the trade financing gap or the financing gap or the MSME financing gap. However they call it, is a big problem that we can solve it together. And I'm pretty sure our perspective, Alejandro and mine, those are 2 ways for tackling the problem, and there are many out there, and those should be explored, and those should be hopefully checked which ones can be implemented, and hopefully we can solve the problem together.
Yeah. Look, this pie is way too big, right? It's way too big for people to believe like, you're my competitor.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just
with frenemies or collaboration. I'm kidding. Yes, it's all about collaboration. And as you know, at Finastra, we of course believe, and we're leading the platformification of banking with a platform and our open ecosystem. So of course, we're really championing that cause, which should also be reflected in that space, trade finance and DeFi. So extremely important to us. Well, thank you so much. I think we covered a lot. Is there any one topic or one question or one comment you'd like to make before I wrap up? Alejandro? Or anything you want to share about your organization? Anything exciting coming up, or that you just announced?
Well, if you allow me, actually, today we closed the first funding of an asset on our Spring Path program, which is a huge, today.
Congratulations.
It happened today.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, guys. So it's a huge achievement. And well, the idea will be just to replicating this and bring more SMEs.
It's getting traction.
Awesome. Perfect timing.
Indeed.
Like, really, congratulations. And Miguel, anything you'd like to announce, or anything coming up, or which has just been published, or?
From my side, I would like to mention that with IC3Com, we're really willing to go into production stage within this semester in Ecuador, and therefore servicing really those that need financing more.
Okay. I think it's pretty clear again. So thank you so much. I'm going to close now. So it was a fascinating topic, and we could talk for hours. So it was a brilliant conversation, but we have to wrap up. Unfortunately, thank you again to all of you for watching us live or on demand if you're watching later. And thank you, of course, thank you so much, muchas gracias, to our wonderful guests, Alejandro and Miguel. Thank you very much, guys. In terms of call to action, so we invite you now to do a few things. That's just the start of the conversation. So please feel free to connect with us directly and individually on the likes of social media. So probably LinkedIn is a good place. If you're watching live, again, one last time, please feel free to check out the ideation session tomorrow. It's at 1 p.m. UK time on the 24th of March, 2022. And last but not least, again, if you're watching before the 10th of April, please join the movement, register now on the Hackathon's website, and please help us redefine finance for good and create some value and help more people, more organizations worldwide all together. So encore merci, à la prochaine, et thank you guys.
Thank you, Christophe. Ciao, Miguel.
Hasta luego.
Join Finastra for its global hackathon and be part of the movement. Welcome to Hack to the Future 4. Connect with our global community to learn about decentralized finance. Discover how to build a better future with sustainable and inclusive finance. And learn how to scale up with banking as a service and embedded finance. Win prizes from Finastra and our partners to help you continue your fintech journey. Register now at fintech.devpost.com.